Welcome, every many and everyone, to this session of the 7th edition of the Plural Positivity World Conference. This session is presented by Keech, covering important and sensitive topics including mental health, suicide prevention, trauma. Please remember to prioritize your self-care during the session. You're encouraged to take breaks whenever needed and honor your collective emotional well-being. If you have questions for the presenter, please share them under the Questions tab so they can be addressed during the live Q&A. Afterward, we warmly invite you to visit this presenter's booth where you'll find helpful PDFs and additional free resources. Now, without further ado, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our wonderful presenter to you all. Here's Keech.
Hi, my name is Keech. I am a plural system. I have been working in the mental health field since, 20 years or so, since 2003, although I was a program manager at suicide prevention since 2000. I'm also ADHD, which is autism and ADHD combined. A lot of us in the system have different ways that can be expressed outwardly. And I'm here to talk about a neurodiversity affirmative model working with plurality. And I know this is a bit clinical, but I think it'll be useful for people who don't have clinical degrees. I think it's probably graspable for everybody, and I think it's good to kind of go over and see what people think. I am wearing a black jacket. I have a silver tie with flowers on it. I have a black button-up shirt. I have, it used to be black hair, but now it's much more silver. That's curly and tied back a little bit. I also have freckles, sort of a Caucasian, middle-aged, I don't go by they, them, but sometimes I'm a woman, sometimes I am more male identified, and sometimes I'm a combination thereof or neither, depending on who is fronting. But let's get into some of the concepts. So I'm going to go over some definitions first. I'm going to be using the term plural. Plural is an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term for many people who feel like they are more than one. I'm going to be using the term body-mind. So body-mind is the concept of someone who, a whole being that is not just a brain. And it's not even just the nervous system, it's the whole skin. It's how everything works together and functions together in unison. So you have a lot of different neurons throughout our entire body, not just our brain, lungs, gut, heart, stomach. We even have the building blocks within our blood. And all of these things and all of our experiences contribute to how every many just kind of functions in the world. But back to the definition of plural. So plurality can include other specified dissociative disorder, and it can include dissociative identity disorder, but it can also include anybody who feels like they are more than one in their being. And that can include many kinds of forms, and it can include indigenous cultures and spiritual concepts around the world. A lot of the medical model of DID and OSDD is really white-centric and colonialist in terms of defining what is correct and what is single and what is outside of that. It makes a nod to the plurality in a wider cultural concept, but it doesn't actually embrace it or include it in the clinical work. It sort of goes from a specific Western mindset. I'm going to be using the term selves and people. I'm going to be using this instead of parts. I'm going to be using this instead of the structural theory of dissociations terms of ANP, apparently normal part, and emotional part. I'm going to be using this instead of functioning labels. The reason why I do this is I believe it comes from a more feminist psychology perspective and humanist perspective, as well as it takes away from the corporatization or the pathology model of selves inside a plural system are things, functions, jobs. I don't believe that any part of a self is a job more than, and believe that any human I interact with is a job. So I believe it gives an entire self or collection of selves more dignity. I believe that it is more respectful, and it's meeting different aspects of whomever's in a system where they are and honoring them for who they are instead of making them an object or a function or a thing. I think that approach in and of itself is disrespectful and then puts everything into more of a disease model that things are wrong, and it shames selves. It doesn't have a respect for what and who they are and what they bring to the entire system's functioning. You've been using the term system. System is a term I'm using for a collection of selves that function together within a body mind. I'm going to be using the term singlet. There are other terms for this. Some people use monomind. Some people use singular, but this is just the term that I'm going to be using throughout because it's easier for me to grasp for this lecture. And I've already gone over the term body mind, so that's also going to be, as I said, used throughout. I was going to share my slides, but it got clunky and it isn't quite working, so I'm just going to talk to them through, and I can probably send them to people if they'd like them. I am going to be discussing the social model of disability, and I'm not going to be leaning on the medical model of disability. Now, disability is not a dirty word. Different people who have differences do encounter difficulty and disability in moving through the world, much like a left-handed person has a lot more difficulty working and navigating the world than somebody who's right-handed. The world is built for right-handed people. So left-handed people do get into more accidents because doors, scissors, cars, not made for left-handed people. Does that mean that there's anything wrong with being left-handed? No, absolutely not. And the world is not designed for plural people. So it does make it harder to navigate in the world as a plural person. For instance, there's a huge call to mask more, but we can get into that and many other things later. The medical model sort of suggests that there's something wrong with the person, that they can be fixed, they can be brought into health if only they repair or shift or change this. To bring this to the example of left-handedness, left-handedness used to be called sinister. Left in Italian is sinistre. The fix was to force children to use their right hand because that was considered normal and more dominant, and all kinds of things were done to force kids to abandon left-handedness and favor their right hand, blend in, because that made them normal. It fixed what was the abhorrent thing that they were doing, using their left hand as a dominant, part of how they worked through the world. Was that great? No, and it did cause trauma. People are different. The neurodiversity affirmative lens is that there are differences, and these differences are important. They're important for the way that we work and wander through the world and collaborate with each other. The differences that we have, however they may be, are the building blocks for innovation, for creativity, for cultural explosions, for new ideas, and just enjoying each other. And this is a bit of the foundation that I am going forward with. So as you can see, sometimes it is difficult to be plural in the world, and that doesn't necessarily have to be if we could adapt the world to be different to wrap around plurality. It does change in terms of, is this person somebody that needs to be changed to be singular, or is this person okay as they are as plural? I think that with a neurodiversity lens, what we're really looking at is the person suffering? Are they uncomfortable? Are they impacted by different kinds of complexities and trauma? Are their selves impacted by different complexities and trauma? And how can we alleviate that rather than erase the plurality by forcing fusion if that's not their choice? The concept of us bouncing all of our ideas off of each other with our different states, our different ways that we are in the world, whether we are left-handed or right-handed, whether we have dyscalculia or dyslexia, whether we use a wheelchair, or whether we maybe have different cognitive styles. All of that, when we mix it together and we're not trying to fix it and put it into one correct state, that's the superior state, that's called neurocosmopolitanism. That was a term coined by Nick Walker around just the mix. It's not creating a superior construct. It's what happens when we mix everything together. What happens when we collaborate psychologically with each other? What happens when we collaborate socially with each other? So what would it be like if we could have a culture or a world that would embrace this more? I know that it does affect people who have voice hearers who believe they're more categorizing themselves as having schizophrenia in different parts of the world. Voice hearers don't have as much stress around their voice hearing if they're just having voice hearing, and sometimes people who have a lot of stress from their voice hearing, if they don't feel themselves a plural, they might view themselves as having psychosis, but nonetheless are hearing different kinds of voices talking to them. In America, in the United States, a lot of these voices tend to be punitive, angry, shaming, violent, scary. In other parts of the world where it's not held as an othering concept, the voices are a lot more gentle. The voices may sound like people's parents asking them or telling them that they need to clean their room better. So it does seem to be that if we have a different way that we hold each other, the ways that we're going to walk in the world will be impacted. And it would be really interesting to see what that would look like. So the neurodiversity affirmative movement, as it's gained steam, has called into question the existence of neuronormativity at all. All of our brains are different in different kinds of ways, but that's different than saying everybody's a little bit autistic, right? Because that's sort of pushing people to say, you're probably not autistic. Autism is damage. You're not autistic. So you're probably normal with some traits because you're normal, because there's a normal. But neurodiversity affirmative movement embraces that none of us are normal. There is no normal to get back to, and that all of our deviations and creative ways of being and different ways of walking the world are okay, and we can embrace them, but also accommodate them and not ignore them. So neurodiversity encompasses quite a wide range. Some people, when they hear that, they only think of autism, but neurodiversity includes plurality. Neurodiversity includes autism and ADHDers and Down syndrome and multiple sclerosis, trauma, depression, a whole range to traumatic brain injury. Sometimes you're born with a difference, and sometimes you acquire a difference later when you have more than one difference as you go along, whether you're born with them or they are acquired later. That's called multiply neurodivergent or neurocomplex, because the combination of those impacts the way that you see and work in the world. So if I am plural and I'm also ADHD, all the ADHD stuff interacts with my different selves and impacts how all of those selves collaborate together to walk through the world, rather than if I did not have that component. They're not side by side. And most people in the world, frankly, have one or more neurodivergence of some sort. But when I was going through some of this, there is this sort of reification of a single self, and a single self is what is normal and what is neurotypical. And there really isn't any science behind that. We have an assumption that there is supposed to be one single self. I think some of this gets back to the concept more religiously around a soul, a single soul. I think some of it gets to a concept of people being a little scared of their identity. What if they don't have a single identity? What if their identity can change? What if there are multiple aspects of their identity that aren't just masks or traits that are put on, but actually different selves inside of themselves? I think that is pretty terrifying for a lot of people, but it isn't unique among people who are plural. Octopi have 9 brains, and those brains function in the octopus differently. They interact. There are some different kinds of scientific explorations of different creatures that say that the different sets of neurons that are available within the body are different brains and do think independently. So I think cockroaches have about supposed to have 3 different brains, if I've got that right. Sometimes sometimes some people say dogs have a couple different brains. Humans have, depending on which source you look at, between, I think, what was it, 1 and, is it 5 brains? You've got the brain in the head, but then you can divide that into 2 brains, and sometimes that happens, and they do think independently when that occurs. There are a bunch of neurons in the heart, and those can and sometimes are thought to think somewhat independently, although interconnectedly. There are a bunch of neurons in the lungs. There are a bunch of neurons in the stomach, and then there are a bunch of neurons in the lower gut, and each of these things do function together. But they have found that if somebody has a full heart and lung transplant, that person may in fact get the memories and consciousness of the person that they had the transplant from, and sometimes even the likes and the dislikes, while retaining their own memory and consciousness and likes and dislikes. So that's almost like, I would consider that a medical form of plurality. It's been verified where somebody had a heart and lung transplant, and they were, I don't know exactly how old they were, but they were, I think, a cis white woman who was heterosexual, and she suddenly just found herself after the surgery liking or having a draw to drink beer, and was attracted uh, to women, a certain type of woman. And when she met the family of the person that she got the heart and lung transplant from, she found it was a young man who died in a motorcycle accident. And these things were actually his preferences. She was kind of carrying them on inside. I've also recently heard about other people getting preferences and some memories from blood transfusions. And while blood doesn't necessarily carry neurons, it carries the building blocks for neurons, and so it could be pretty powerful in that particular way. So if we think about, yeah, singularity of self, I think that's a favored way people want to lean, but I don't think there's really scientific basis for it anymore. That there's scientific basis for a lot of the things that we discuss as fact. In fact, when in regards to plurality, DID, and OSDD, a lot of these are just very articulate theories that we like or we embrace, and stories that we keep telling and moving down. But you might even think of people as being, I mean, Putnam, with the structural theory of dissociation, has said that people maybe are born plural and then gel up if they have good enough parenting to be a singlet self. And would that be conditioning? Would that be conditioning a plural? Somebody might be naturally plural into being singular in order to fit into a more mono or singlet world. I don't know. It's something to think about and discuss. So in that way, we all go on to question what really is normal and what are we taught should be normal. More complex understandings of autism and collaboration between actually autistic people online led to many more people being able to be curious and understand themselves better, as well as seek a correct diagnosis for themselves as adults if they chose to do that, which in turn has shifted the view to question what neurotypicality even is, if it even exists. Perhaps the connection with being able to see all of the ways dissociative identity can look like, or plurality in community interacting online, has caused a movement in both self-awareness as well as new questions on just what exactly a singular identity is, and why do we embrace this as the primary or the most healthy form of identity? What science is actually behind that? And some people have gone on in the establishment world, have sort of made a case that they think that there is some sort of passed on um, neurodivergence that needs to lay the groundwork for plurality to even exist at all. A lot of times this is called high hypnotizability in the research papers, which is something I've looked into. I know I've looked into Kaufman, Lowenstein, Brand, and Sarr. I know Kaufman specifically calls it a genetic component. Sorry, my dog. Not sure that's the correct term according to some other people I work with who specialize in epigenetics. But that component is specifically called high hypnotizability, and without it, somebody could have a lot of intensity, a lot of experiences, a lot of misses, and never develop plurality. And there are individuals who, according to papers with SAR, um, let's say people who are born without big T traumas, and I hate to rank traumas, but will develop plurality if their parents seem to have a high level of dissociation and are emotionally detached, although those systems tend to be smaller according to VEDITSAR. So high hypnotizability, I was really kind of bugged by this 'cause it's a pretty vague concept. It turns out it is a neurotype. The neurotype that I looked into, though, doesn't quite match DID, so I'm a little curious about how that goes. It does have a high level of monotropism, which is an ability to concentrate on something for a very long period of time with an intensity. And that is a brain structure. There's a brain structure that allows people to do that. It's an increased functional connectivity between the left dorsolateral and prefrontal cortex. Between the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. So those are hyper connected. I was really curious because that seemed like, I bet that's in autism. I bet if I look, I'll find that in autism. And yeah, that is something that is found in autism. The thing that I didn't find that was an overlap, so it still seems like an open and curious question, is that there are also higher levels of dopamine and higher levels of oxytocin in people who have high hypnotizability that seem to be maybe they relax more and focus in. But that is not the case in the studies of people who have DID and OSDD. So they might have this one particular component, but they don't have this other component. I think a lot more, I think it might be a little bit of a sloppy label put onto something. There might be something to that, but I think it's something that gets kind of repeated and parroted over and over again. And I don't know that the people who are putting it in the studies have actually looked at the clinical overview and the specific brain structure that high hypnotizability really has when they mention it in the papers. But it's interesting. It does mean that there is something passed down that's expected that causes one person to be able to be plural and one person cannot, another person cannot. And the other thing that's often stated in a lot of these works is that somebody who's born from plural parents will have a higher likelihood of being plural just because they're born from that. Some of the reasoning from this in the papers is that I think Lowenstein and Brand recently published a paper that just talked about this, is that there's inconsistencies with the parent. So then the kid is trying to keep up by matching the inconsistencies. And so then they develop a plurality that doesn't really feel solid enough for me, because there are a lot of kids out there who have inconsistent parents of a variety of sort, and maybe their parents aren't plural, but they are certainly inconsistent, and they don't necessarily develop or have plurality as an adult. So I do think that there's something more there. I'm also seeing some people who have some pretty attentive parents who are plural, and the kid seems to have some plurality. It's just something that I think has never really fully been researched. There really has never been any research on people who feel like they are plural, who don't have a lot of trauma history or feel like they don't have a lot of trauma history, and people who have DID, they haven't matched those up to see what's different and what's the same and what's going on with the brain structures and what's happening. So all of this is just kind of guesswork and theories and concepts that get favored and then passed down and passed down and passed down. But in a lot of the theories that are talked about and the treatment modalities, a lot of the final desired outcome for folks who go into treatment who have DID or OSDD, the outcome is that they should fuse. There is some sort of statement that people don't necessarily have to fuse into one singlet self, but that usually means maybe there's some unresolved trauma, but you can be, you can go along and have functional multiplicity. But it's not, it's often kind of stated as this isn't the best. The gold standard is fusion. Even still, it seems like that's discussed, that being plural in a world where singularity is and being singlet is embraced is seen as an aberration, is seen as an undesirable difference. It's seen as not entirely having finished the whole thing. And I think a lot of that comes to the authoritarian concept of having a single normal structure that can be defined by a medical model, which is rather authoritarianism and does actually have some of its roots in fascism, wherein a predictable populace that has uniform thinking, uniform likes and dislikes will do the same things, will have same allegiance, will have the same neurological structure is more desired because it's predictable and it's controllable. If you step outside of that box, there's a lot of guesswork, and that's a little exhausting for people who really want to predict your behavior for their benefit. But the fusion towards the idea of having somebody fuse and move towards a singlet self kind of reminds me of behavioral analysis with autism. It's not necessarily helping the autistic person be the best they can be in the world. It's trying to pop them into a mold of looking more like they aren't autistic. And a lot of that has them ignoring themselves, dissociating, sensations, light, sounds, whether or not they want to make eye contact, just performing normativity. And I do see that in a lot of the ways that people talk about fusion. I've often heard, and I know this isn't always, but some people performing some systems, performing fusion to please the therapist. So then a lot of the system members go away because they're either upset or feel rejected, or they're just trying to hide to make things go along to get along. And then there's this assumption that the person that's mostly been talking to the therapist is the main self, and that everybody's blended into that main self, and then it's a success and people can clap and the therapist can pat themselves on the back and the person can go along being a success story. And then a few years later, the selves pop out again from hiding because they never really were that way, or they can temporarily blend and mask that way, but then come apart again. Some people have viewed that as a treatment failure, but it really is just the self is different, presenting differently and functioning differently in the world. This is maybe the best. This is just how they are. This is the best way that they experience the world because it is authentic to them. So much, it's the same way with ABA therapy, being more recognizably autistic, stimming, making allowances for things that do not feel pleasant and adjusting for those things, not throwing themselves into social situations that are overwhelming, attending to when their nervous system is been just kind of pummeled, and not caring if they look weird, whatever that may be, is much more healthier, decreases a lot of depression, anxiety, stress, overwhelm, can make a person much more successful, even if they're not necessarily financially successful, doing a job in the way that, we measure success as a productive citizen, because that again is a package of fascism. We're measuring people by their productivity rather than our interactions and collaborations as a society together, and how we experience health and happiness and contentment and collaboration. It is pretty well studied that masking creates high levels of depression and suicidality in folks who are autistic. And I also think it's never been studied. I believe high masking in people who are plural to appear singlet, to appear one, also creates the same level of depression, anxiety, overwhelm, and suicidality than just being able to be out in the world and be plural. And I think that in social media, I know that it's much maligned, but things spaces like TikTok and spaces like Instagram, where people can do short videos as a group, as a system, and kind of show who they are naturally and interact and see each other in the small videos, has created authentic moments of plural joy. I don't know that the establishment understands that being able to unmask and fully embody oneself in a space and interact with others, being fully embodied in themselves, creates there's when a trans person is able to be their full self and get gender affirmative care, there's a term where they have gender euphoria. Just being authentically who themselves creates an internal euphoria. And I think the same is true with plural people, being able to embrace and embody authentically who the different selves are and be that without having to shove it down or smash it together creates a plural euphoria. It's a lot of work creating what's called a singlet sona. A singlet sona is a agreed upon outward singlet face for plurals to put on so that they appear one while switching. Everybody has to compromise quite a lot and think through things so much more than somebody who's singlet just going out in the world has to think through in terms of outfit choice, mannerisms, speaking tone, accent, all sorts of things are taking so much more effort for a plural system to think through than somebody who's singlet, and that drains the battery down badly. So in terms of working with folks who are plural, if you're a therapist, or if you're just interacting and you're a singlet and you don't know, but you want to respect the inner world as somebody who's a guest. So the inner world is whatever's going on, whatever landscape is inside a plural system. I often say lots of people who are plural are a bit like TARDIS, it's bigger on the inside. But that might not necessarily be a visual landscape, but it may be, but it may not. It may just be a bigger sense. It may be a sense of where people reside inside, whether they're residing in an arm or in the stomach or spatially in the back, above, to the side. Some people find each other and locate each other out by sense of smell, texture, however that is. It doesn't have to map into like a visual landscape, but there is a space inside where people are. And if somebody is letting you in to talk about the space and where the selves are and how they feel themselves to be inside of the system, that is a privilege to be respected and honored. And everybody has a little bit of a different experience of the system of how that works for them. So none of it's cookie cutter. Some therapists really kind of expect it to map out in a specific way, and it really doesn't. I mean, selves don't even match looking a human shape all the time. I know a lot of us know this. It can be animal shaped, monster shaped, sometimes diamond shape or dot shape or spark shape or blade of grass or, a wall. They don't have to then change into being human shaped just because that's the most comfortable way that the therapist understands them to be. You can respect somebody's personhood as a blade of grass, and that is totally fine. That is totally fine. The only reason it wouldn't be is that the person interacting with that is uncomfortable by it, and that maybe is something that they need to go to their own therapy or consultation to deal with for themselves. The inner world is generally pretty complex for different systems, not always, but so, if you're a therapist, you don't want to bumble in and just try to change things. You don't want to bumble in and just try to create a safe space because that might not even be possible within that particular system and might make a big mess. You don't want to do things without collaborating with the system. It's got to be the system's choice and understanding and what they want. And you don't wipe away things. You don't try to wipe away things in a system. I've heard of therapists trying to do this, like breaking glass or wiping away a wall, because that can create huge floods of feelings, memory, affect. All of these things are there for a reason, and it's important to respect that they are there for a reason. You're not to go and just kind of think you know better and mess with it. Some things are changeable, and if the system wants to change something, that should be done through talking about it, the pros and cons, what it looks like, what it is, whether system members want it at all or not, or whether they want to try a small piece of that out to see how it goes and then chuck it later if they hate it. You're a guest. Some people mix up dissociation with plurality. I think these are actually two separate things. Different selves can have varying levels of dissociative experiences of depersonalization, derealization, floating. They may have dissociated memories from each other, where they're holding different concepts and thoughts and feelings. But an individual self within a system could be very well grounded and present, while other selves are not. There may even, I've met some systems that have a smaller system that so it's easier for them to check. That's why I say smaller, where all the selves have done a lot of work and they're all fairly grounded, much more than many singlet non-systems are. But the concept that they aren't fused has some sort of judgment that somehow they are more dissociated, and that in and of itself is incorrect, which I think is another pejorative label or lens through which plurality is viewed in terms of what's correct and what's right and what's wrong. I think this is sort of a tale that a lot of singlet therapists have told themselves so they can understand plurality, much like theory of structural dissociation, through a singlet lens, through their own life experience. They feel like if I were separated from myself, I would be separated from myself because I would want to shove part of myself away. That's how they've told that story to them, and then they've applied it to the person and the plural system in front of them, much to like with the theory of structural dissociation, where there's this concept of I think when I stumbled on a smaller trauma, I understood where the singlets had come up with some of this, because, I did understand that there was a person who thought I had hit him, but I didn't hit him in my car. He, I think, mistook me from somebody else. He thought I was on the freeway, and I'd never been driving on the freeway. I drove off a side path that was next to the freeway, but he decided that I was that person that he should go and chase down, and it was scary for me. And so I did have some intrusions around him yelling at me and kind of cornering me and chasing me. Um, but all of that kind of eventually went away. So I did feel those intrusions as I went through the day, doing my normal job, and felt like I was pushing those things back. And I could well see that as being what a singlet therapist would have thought of as an emotional part intruding and being separate, and me pushing it, that intrusion aspect away while I'm doing my day-to-day functioning and just trying to get along to do my normal job. But plurality is much more varied, complex, and nuanced than that. A lot of selves don't have, like I said earlier, job functions, as I don't believe in necessarily job functions, especially kids not having jobs. But a lot of selves then grow into, even if they have been stuck in a trauma memory, if you can get them out and you have a relationship with them, they blossom and bloom and have a variety of interests, just like any kid can, and become three-dimensional in a lot of ways in terms of their likes or their dislikes, things they fear, things they want. Every self has the potential to be really complex, much more and much more varied outside of an EP or an ANP. A lot of the work with plural systems is more like actual family or group work. I'm trying to help people get on the same team, even if they don't necessarily like each other, because they're kind of stuck together and they want to maybe function a little better and more smoothly. So communication, collaboration. If you're making somebody a job and then you have the idea that maybe that job is defunct because the person's gotten bigger and they're not in the same life situation, and you want to assign them a new job, that really just limits the interaction and what that particular self can do and how that self is going to experience the world. Um, But we might look at how we build community in general. How do we collaborate? How do we collect when we're in our outside bodies? Much the same principles happen on the inside. How do people get into power positions and why? And does that serve them? And do they even like it? They want people to help, control the decision weight. Do they want to share it and switch off? Do they want to take time off? Do they know why they're doing what they're doing in that particular social structure in the first place? Or did they just pick it up because nobody else was doing it and somebody had to? All of these things I think definitely apply when you're working with plurality, helping people kind of think outside of the previous roles that they were stuck into because that's what there was to do, and have more creativity and think just wider and bigger. Just helps everybody in the system along. It does kind of shake things up sometimes a bit, but that does do that if you look at outside communities too. And some of that shaking up is needed for growth and getting a little oxygen in the system and having things expand. Then there seems to be a lot of confusion about kids and systems, or lots of rigid rules around kids and systems from clinical establishment models. I'm not sure why. I kind of know a little bit about why. I think some people maybe got in trouble with their bad boundaries with kids and systems, but they probably also had bad boundaries with the adults and systems too. And so some certain rigid rules took place, but I don't know that they are actually the most helpful rules. I think they're just there to protect maybe more the therapist rather than actually support clinical work with plurals. I think all of the kids in systems should be treated with respect and dignity. I don't think that they are a side thing. I don't think that um, they that they lack valuable skills in terms of the team. I think they're integral to the team. They often have been around for a very long time and have a lot of knowledge, because kids in systems are a little bit different than outside kids who have only had maybe 8 or 9 or 12 years of experience. These inside kids have been around for maybe decades. So they have different ways that they are in the world, and they have different things that they know, but it's important to get to know the kid to know what is true for them, because some kids in systems do have limited body experience and life experience, and so very much are much like outside younger kids. They may not know how to cook. They may not know how to do a lot of day-to-day life activities, whereas other kids in systems may have learned how to smoke and are excellent cooks and do driving pretty well. You just have to hang out with them and find out who and how they are. There is a concept where in the establishment world where people should just talk to the adults and the kids should hang back because the adults should be present to parent the kids. But a lot of those adults don't really know how to take care of these kids. They never were taught. And so to expect them to just jump in and swim is a little bit cruel. I think when I work with kids, the adults hang back because they're always hanging. Everybody's kind of hanging around and checking things out when the therapy's going on, and if they want to, they get to learn and pick up skills how in terms of how I'm interacting with the kids, what I'm doing with the kids, what kind of boundaries and how I'm explaining things. And they start to absorb some of those things, because you can't just tell them, you can't just give somebody a parenting book. Sometimes you have to actually experience it and experience what it's like, and then it can be absorbed. Kids are really wanting connection and attachment. I think that scares a lot of adult therapists, but it's also true of adults in systems too. They want connection and attachment. It's just that I think the kids are a little more vocal with less filter around it. And it doesn't mean that the adults are going to have any less of an intense attachment, especially if they're starved and don't have a lot of spaces where they can be their authentic selves. I think just applying that across the board is a smarter way to go, because I think it's kind of othering the kids and making the kids a second, like a second rate self in the self. And I think that's also childish. I don't know if people know the term childish, where children are often in societies treated as a lesser human, not worthy of being respected for their ideas, their wants, their dislikes, their desires for boundaries, their desires for engagement, their learning styles, their ability to say no. All of those things in a lot of societies are not valued. And so then we don't help the kid understand and learn how to embody those things and be a more well-rounded, more thoughtful adult as they grow. And so it's also the same, I think, for system kids, being able to treat them as equal to any adult in the system is really important for them to learn how to set boundaries for themselves and bodily autonomy and what they like and what they don't like, and that they are valuable, because they may never have gotten that message. And you don't just get that message by just lip service. You have to show them. Which is why I also work with whomever shows up in the therapy room when they want to show up. Sometimes I will change that if there's an emergency, but whomever shows up for a particular reason, and they usually have something to say, whether they want to tell me about something, whether they want to process something. And even if, say, the adults are pissed off at me and they don't want to show up in the room, so unfortunately they sent a kid in because the kid isn't able to kind of say, I don't want to be here either, and then we can process why and how that feels for the kid and maybe what's going on for the adults, rather than just forcing a situation where the kid isn't allowed to be there and making it a bad act, a shameful act, something wrong, something avoidant. The system is collaborating as a team, and if we work with them as a team with all ages, then everybody's going to learn how to navigate that better, so it works better for the system rather than what I say and what I think is correct, because I'm not in that system. So my guess is not going to be the correct one unless I sit down and we all look at it and figure it out together. And sometimes kids are a great like way to have a release valve, because some of the adults get, even though a lot of the adults are considered the day-to-day functioners who don't have a lot of experience with trauma, sometimes they do hold some trauma that they remember, if that's how they function, if that's their history, and get overwhelmed very quickly. And so the kids sometimes come out to engage in play a lot easier if the adults have a hard time with that. Create a break, create a space to have some fun. maybe a change, and maybe get some care, and all of that serves to take everything down a notch. It's just like a release valve in the group. And you can see this with outside group dynamics too, with people who are more like comedians or clowns in the group. They kind of pop out to take everything down a notch when things get a little too intense. It's not bad. The other thing I've seen a lot is therapists that get really impatient with teens, which I think is funny. I guess they may have not had a lot of work with teens. Teens get cranky, teens get angry. Teens are impulsive because when the body is a teenage body, there's different stuff that's going on with the brain that make somebody more impulsive. And it's not entirely bad either, because there's a lot more access to high ranges of emotions and low ranges of emotion and deep feeling that kind of dulls out when people age out of emerging adulthood. The selves inside the system do seem to retain some of that when they come out. And I think that's a really great and valuable thing. I think a lot of therapists haven't really worked a lot with young adults and teens, so they may not appreciate how forward and unfiltered some of these folks are, but I appreciate it quite a lot, to be honest. I think also some therapists may take folks inside who don't have a filter and then say you're a protector, or you're I don't know, an abuser in the system, or there's some sort of particular label that just defines them. And I was sort of wondering, like, what would I think if I met somebody while I was pissed off about something, and then from there on they decided I was the protector of, I don't know, whatever group I belonged to, and that was all that they engaged with me as, and the name that they engaged with me as. I think that would piss me off a lot more. I don't think that would help me want to collaborate with them. I don't think that would feel good. It's another reason why we need to look at all of the selves as whole selves, because they are. The last thing I'm going to go through is just gender and gender diversity in systems. Some systems are cis, and all the selves inside the system are cis. Some are trans, and all the selves are that same identity. And most systems I have encountered have a mix. I have a mix inside of myself, selves that are femme identifying but have male bodies, some that identify as cis, some that identify as neither, some that identify as a mix of sliding genders in themselves, and there's just kind of a bunch of different kinds of selves that have different ranges of gender. There is some belief that I've run into that seems to float around that if somebody is trans or has selves that are identifying a separate gender than the body was born with. That's a little bit clunky. I'm going to try that again. If there are selves that don't have the same gender identity as was assigned to the body, then that is trauma-based. And if you fix all the trauma and you resolve all the trauma, then they will identify with the sex assigned to the body at birth, and then everything's going to line up. But that's not true. That's a profound misunderstanding of gender and gender identity, and especially gender identity in systems. There is an idea sometimes that if somebody has a masculine identity and the body was assigned female at birth, that they took on the abuser's identity, and that's how they're presenting, which can sometimes have some truth to it. But more often than not, I've seen selves that just take on that identity because that's kind of how they feel, and they may not present aggressively at all. I have males in my system that are very interested in taking care of the kids in my system, and they're much more interested in it than the female selves in the system. Things don't necessarily follow expectation, and I don't think expecting them to, or creating a map and sitting down with a reason that you've concocted that the selves are the way they are is going to lead you to a collaboration and exploration and better communication within the system. There is a really good research paper, which I think a lot of you know about, called It's Just a Body, written by Terrell et al. I believe a number of plural systems worked on this. I should link it. I don't want to say the plural names of the systems out loud, which is what I remember them by, because I know those aren't the names on the paper. So I'll just say the paper's called It's Just a Body, and you should look it up. It has a really great breakdown through the paper of how different plural systems would like to be addressed by providers when seeking gender affirmative care. A lot of the different selves want to be addressed as the gender that they feel that they are as they're presenting in the body. So it's good to change the gender, the pronouns as you are meeting with different selves as they come through in the body. Some systems don't want that at all. Some systems don't want to announce who's showing up, but they prefer to have a they, them, or a collaborative gender pronoun that they all agree upon. And it's great to post welcoming signs if you're in gender affirmative care as a therapist and working with plural. So you might want to post not only pride and trans affirming, like different flags and different colors and things like that, but you might want to post plural signs and stickers and things like that to show that you are also a plural ally, and this is a space where you understand and respect and honor plurality. You might want to help them collaborate more if they're working on gender affirmative care in terms of how they want the body to be, but they know they want the body to be different, but they're having trouble discussing it, and different selves want different things. Having a space where they can all have their feelings and their thoughts respected and discussed, and their fears and their hopes put out onto the table and be equally respected is a huge, huge, huge thing that they may not have in any other space. So being able to help navigate that with them as sort of just a collaborative guide is a big deal. And you might get to a space where they can hash out things that they got really stuck on in terms of who wants what and how and why, especially if they're able to break things down with each other. It is true that, and according to this paper, and people who are non-binary or have not a binary gender presentation they have more prejudice with the medical providers than people who have like a system who has a binary presentation, because the medical system doesn't has a lot of bias towards non-binary presentations. They worry, I don't know, they have a lot of pejorative, they have a lot of medicalizing, they have a lot of othering if the person doesn't want the body to be strictly this way or that way. However, a lot of plural systems that are non-binary do want gender affirmative approaches that will be non-binary, and then because it's the most comfortable for everybody collaboratively to present in the body. And that is a nuanced conversation that takes time. Having that ability to affirm that non-binary bodies and psyches exist, especially in the plural community, is extremely important. Particularly because a lot of people will end up presenting falsely as a binary in order to access gender affirmative care, and then hide their plurality in order to access gender affirmative care, and then may come out with that later after they've been able to get some of the support that they are seeking. But I hope that this has been useful. I know I kind of skimmed through a lot of material rather quickly. Like I said, I have slides that I can share if people are interested. And thanks so much for listening.